and are cycled through ecosystems. A terrestrial ecosystem is an ecosystem that is land-based. This could be a forest or a meadow. An aquatic ecosystem is an ecosystem that is water-based, either fresh water or salt water. This could be a lake or an ocean. We're going to take a look at how various nutrients are cycled throughout the biosphere. The first cycle we will look at is the water cycle. Water continually cycles through the hydrosphere, lithosphere, and atmosphere through the processes of evaporation. This occurs when water from the ground is heated by the sun and enters the atmosphere. Once water enters the atmosphere, if it is cooled, it will undergo condensation. This is the process by which water vapor condenses into liquid water. Once this condensation becomes more saturated, the precipitation will return the water back down to the ground. Water will trickle all over the ground until it eventually runs off into oceans or lakes, only to continue this process over and over again. Next, we'll take a look at the carbon cycle. Carbon is an element that is abundantly found in all living things. Carbon is removed from the atmosphere by plants and algae in the process of photosynthesis. Carbon is returned to the environment by several processes. Firstly, organisms break down plant and animal matter, and carbon is returned in the form of CO2, or carbon dioxide. Next, the burning of fossil fuels. For example, the fuel used in your automobiles comes from fossils. When we burn that fuel, it releases carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Finally, when animals die, they decompose, as well as plants, and some of their matter is converted into fossil fuels, returning carbon back into the earth. In this diagram, we can see the various ways carbon enters the atmosphere. We have the burning of fossil fuels and wood. We also have respiration. When you exhale, when all animals exhale, they release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. There are organisms that use sunlight to capture carbon dioxide in the process of photosynthesis. This cycle continues over and over. The nitrogen cycle. Take a deep breath and exhale. 78% of the gas you just inhaled is nitrogen gas. When you exhale, all of that nitrogen is released back into the atmosphere. Most of the air you breathe is nitrogen gas. Unfortunately, most organisms can't use this form of nitrogen. In order for nitrogen, which is essential for life, to be used by organisms, it has to be converted. How does that happen? Well, on land in terrestrial ecosystems, bacteria in the soil convert nitrogen into ammonia. Bacteria also convert nitrogen into nitrates. And finally, lightning bolts that travel through the air contain enough energy to convert the nitrogen in the air into usable forms. In aquatic ecosystems, bacteria, specifically cyanobacteria, are used to convert nitrogen into ammonia. So how do we return the nitrogen back into the environment? Well, we call on the help of bacteria. When plants and animals decay, they return nitrogen back to the environment. We make man-made fertilizers that can return nitrogen into the environment. Sometimes volcanic eruptions happen. And finally, the burning of fossil fuels all contribute to the return of nitrogen into the environment. Here's a diagram showing the continuous nitrogen cycle and the various components that play a role in this cycle. The final cycle we'll take a look at is the phosphorus cycle. Unlike carbon and nitrogen, which both exist as gases in the atmosphere, phosphorus is stored in the lithosphere, in rocks and sediment on the ocean floors, in the form of phosphate. Phosphates enter the environment by the weathering of rocks, by wind and rain, by the leaching and runoff as water passes over land, by plant and animal waste, and once again, by manufacturing of fertilizers and detergents. Here's a diagram showing all the different components of the phosphorus cycle. There is no need to memorize this diagram. The only one I want you to pay specific attention to is the water cycle, knowing the terms evaporation, condensation, precipitation, and runoff. Let's take a look at how human activities affect the nutrient cycles. In the 1950s, many aquatic ecosystems developed excessive algae growth. In Lake Erie, the amount of algae increased 30 times. The process of algae growth is known as eutrophication. The official definition of eutrophication is a process in which the nutrient levels in aquatic ecosystems increase, leading to an increase in the population of primary producers, such as algae. If you take a look at this satellite image of the Great Lakes, you will notice regions of the Great Lakes that are brightly green colored. That color comes directly from algae. What causes algae to grow in abundance and sometimes to unwanted levels inside the Great Lakes? Well, in 1968, 58 of Ontario's thousands of lakes were chosen to be the experimental lakes area. Government and university researchers from around the world use this area to study lake ecology. They found that when excessive phosphorus is added to water, the result is eutrophication. So how does excess phosphorus end up in the bodies of water? Well, it turns out not all of the fertilizers that are applied to farmlands are taken up by the crops and plants. Excess fertilizers containing phosphorus enter the water, and the result is excessive algae growth. So is this a problem? It is, and we'll take a look at this process. But know that in 1972, both Canada and the US signed the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. And since then, the amount of phosphorus in the lake has decreased by more than 50%. Let's follow the steps in which eutrophication happens in a body of water and see the effects on the ecosystem. The first step is fertilizer runoff from the farmland into water. When there's excessive nutrients like phosphorus in the water, it causes algae to bloom. When algae blooms, it covers the surface of the water and it reduces the amount of sunlight that can come into the body of water. What happens is the plants at the bottom of the lake or river, they cannot survive without sunlight, so they begin to die. When the plants die, this causes a cascade of other algae and other plants to die. Soon bacteria enter the picture and use the oxygen that is needed for decomposition of this dead material. Because of the bacteria using up all the oxygen levels in the water drop too low for fish to survive. This process demonstrates eutrophication and its harmful effects. And why did this happen? It happened because of our excessive use of man-made fertilizers that contain phosphorus. I want you to complete this activity where you organize these statements in the correct order to illustrate the cause and effect relationship between plants, animals, and the environment. We're going to take a look at agricultural innovations in the nutrient cycle. Crop rotation practices can result in increased soil carbon content throughout high crop cover periods, reduced frequency, and tillage intensity. Increase in the use of forages in crop rotation can result in better crop residue management, while higher soil carbon content helps to combat climate change. By adding small grains and forages into the rotations of the soil, less fertilizer is required and less pollution is emitted in the process. The addition of a single small grain crop can reduce fossil fuel use, pollution, and damages by about 1/2 according to research. Crop rotation is a central component of all sustainable farming systems. Crop rotation offers the most effective, indirect method of minimizing pest, disease, and weed problems and maintaining soil structure and fertility. So let's summarize all of the benefits of crop rotation. Number 1, we reduce our carbon production. Number 2, this is also reduces our need for energy. It reduces pollution. It's cost effective. Minimizes pests, disease, and weeds. All the while enhancing soil structure and fertility.